Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. This month on this channel, we're talking about self-esteem. And today in particular, we're going to be talking about what happens when we go into social situations feeling aligned, integrated, and authentic versus what happens when we don't. So when I first heard the term that we're going to discuss today, leaky feelings, I thought that is so disgusting and visceral and perfectly apt to what happens when we go into social situations where we are feeling one thing, but we're unable to properly contain that feeling, and we don't want to be explicit about it. So we go in claiming that we are feeling or experiencing one thing, while our true state is evident to everyone around us based on the way that we are acting, based on our posture, our tone, whatever it is. And this is one of the things that causes other people to distrust us the most. If it seems like what we're saying and doing are not in alignment with how we are being. So we're going to go over today why we develop leaky feelings, how to become more aware of when it's happening to us, as well as how to get into better alignment. So how to make sure that as much as possible, we're able to match our inner state with our outer one. Because the more in alignment we are with ourselves, the more confident we feel and the more relaxed we feel. And the more relaxed we feel, the more it signals to other people, I am okay, and I think that you are okay, which is that secure way of relating that we always want to find a center in if possible. So one of the terms that immediately comes to mind when I think about leaky feelings is the term weird energy. So this is one of those things that kind of floats around in pop culture, and there's no specific definition of it, but we all kind of know what it feels like to be around someone who's just giving off a kind of strange, uncomfortable vibe. And often this is a result of that incongruence. So what they're signaling with their body language or their energy is quite different than what they're saying with their words or what they're doing. This idea of congruence in psychology was originally proposed by Carl Rogers, who's kind of renowned as the father of talk therapy. And one of the ways that Carl Rogers described congruence is that it's an alignment between our sensation, so what we are feeling or experiencing on a body and emotional level, our awareness, so what we're consciously aware of our own experience being, and our behavior, actions, and words, so the way that we are showing up in the world. So when we are able to accurately read ourselves, understand and interpret our body signals, our emotions, and our states accurately, and then convey those things to other people in a way that is honest and real, we are congruent. And this is what I would call total and ideal congruence. But that's not always what we have. So there are a couple of different ways where we can show up incongruently, some of which we're not even consciously in control of. And these are the different ways that we leak feelings. So we have this kind of ideal level of congruence that is kind of optimal for psychological functioning, where everything I do and say is in agreement with itself. But then we have this layer beneath it that I call contained incongruence. So this is what happens when we're aware of what our body sensations and our feelings are telling us, so we're able to interpret them accurately. But for some reason, we've chosen to deliberately not be honest about what's happening for us. And this is not always a bad idea, right? There are situations where it's actually quite wise to withhold what we're feeling. Maybe it's an attraction towards a coworker who is in a happily monogamous relationship and who we just don't feel like it would be beneficial for us to confess our feelings for. Or maybe there's a sense of anger we feel that is directed towards someone that we know we are projecting this anger onto, and that really we're in a triggered state. So when we have contained incongruence, essentially what's happening is we're experiencing a feeling or an inner state that we're aware of, but that we're able to self-regulate around enough that our feelings do not leak out of us. So we're able to actually put the boundaries we need in place internally, inside of our own minds, to be clear on the fact that we're not going to behave in a way that is trying to get that emotional state satisfied externally if we've decided that it's not appropriate for us to do that. So we have truly found some way to regulate around our feeling enough that we're not acting weirdly around our coworker or around this person that we're angry at. We're able to compartmentalize in a healthy way, put everything in the appropriate boxes in our brains, and show up in a way that is inauthentic, which is never ideal, but that is not giving off weird energy because our body state is not leaking our feelings without us noticing it. So when we have contained incongruence, we might be putting on a little bit of a show, but it's probably because we've consciously decided that there's a good reason for us to do that, because the social consequences of being congruent all the way through would outweigh the benefits. Now, the layer beneath this is uncontained incongruence, which, by the way, are not terms that Carl Roger used. The contained and uncontained congruence is just language that I use in my own mind to separate these things out. When we have uncontained incongruence, it means one of two things is likely happening. One is that we are having a feeling we're not aware of, or that we're not identifying properly. So those first two layers are in conflict. Maybe I'm feeling depressed or overwhelmed or stressed, but I'm not consciously recognizing that. And so there's a conflict between my sensation and my conscious awareness. And that might cause me to leak out my true feelings. So I might go into work, have a presentation to give, think that I'm feeling good about it, and this is often what happens when we have something like more avoidant patterning, when in reality, I might be giving off signals that I'm actually quite stressed out. But if someone feeds that back to me, I might get pretty defensive because consciously, I don't feel stressed, but my body might be betraying me, so I may be acting incongruent without knowing it. So this is more akin to what we think of as cognitive dissonance. So when what we think we want or what we think that we are feeling is not the truth about what we actually want on a deeper level. And I want to be clear that this happens to people all of the time. This is generally just where we have blind spots. So other people might be able to actually read us better in these areas than we can. And that's one type of uncontained incongruence. We can't adjust our behaviors properly if we don't understand what our underlying motivations are. Another example of this might be people-pleasing. We might have this hidden contract inside of our brains that even we are not conscious of, that we need to go around meeting other people's needs all the time, so that they will then turn around and start taking care of us. But we might not be conscious of that at all. Our conscious story about ourselves might be, I just love helping people out of the goodness of my heart, and I expect nothing in return. But if we do have that implicit contract, what might start happening is that when we help people and don't get the responses we want in return, or the validation that we want in return, we might start to feel angry. And that anger might not be conscious to us, but it might show up on our face, in our posture, in our interactions with the other person. And the other person might be more aware than we are that we are feeling angry at them. Because once again, there's that disconnect. Our anger is leaking out of us because our conscious mind refuses to accept it and notice it for what it is. This is very often what happens when we have shame-bound emotions. Our conscious mind refuses to recognize that we are feeling something because we believe it makes us bad or wrong or shameful to feel that thing. But our body goes on experiencing it. And so this can lead us to showing up with a lot of weird or unaligned energy. It's very hard to contain and self-regulate around feelings or states that we're not aware we are experiencing. The other way to be experiencing uncontained incongruence is when you are actually conscious of what you're feeling or what your body state is, but you're making the deliberate choice not to share it. So this is a slightly different variation of contained incongruence. In both cases, your body state and your conscious awareness are aligned, so you have congruence between those two levels. But in this case, for whatever reason, you're not able to self-regulate around your emotional experience as well as you would hope. So maybe you have a really strong attraction to someone, and you have the story that it's not a good idea to tell that person for whatever reason. It would disrupt your social dynamic too much. But you just can't help when you get around them fawning a little bit or acting like you really want their validation. So even though you are not expressing to them that you feel attracted to them, they can probably kind of tell, or they can at least tell that something about the way you interact with them is quite different than the way that you interact with other people. So you're leaking out those feelings without realizing it, even though you're not being explicit about what's happening. Some other examples of this could be passive aggressiveness. Let's say you are upset at your boss, but can't tell your boss that directly. So instead of stating your anger, you just start to behave in slightly rude or hostile ways towards your boss on a consistent basis. But then when they ask you if something's wrong, you might say, no, of course not. Everything's great. So your behavior and the energy that you're giving off are not aligning. You're not able to effectively self-regulate around your feeling of anger, so it's coming out even when you don't necessarily want it to. This can also lead us to sending kind of mixed messages to people. So maybe we're telling someone, I want this from you, because we think we can't ask for the actual thing we want. But then we're not quite satisfied when they give us the thing we explicitly stated. So let's say we really want someone's validation. But what we tell them is, I just want to be around you. I just want to hang out with you. I just want to spend time with you. But if, when we're spending time with them, they're not giving us the subtle forms of validation that we want from them, we might start acting kind of passive-aggressively once again. And this is going to come across as incongruent to this person who has given you the time and energy that you wanted and asked for, but who has failed to give you the secret hidden desire that you did not make explicit. So once again, these things can be in our awareness or out of our awareness. And often the more shame-bound an emotion is, so the more we have some sort of trauma response around expressing something, and the more we believe that it would be bad for us to do that, the more that thing is not going to be in our conscious awareness, and the more likely we are to be incongruent in situations where we feel it. And I do have a video on toxic shame and dysregulation that I'm going to link in the description of this one that gives you some more information on how this plays out on a personal level. But today we're predominantly looking at how it plays out interpersonally. And I just want to be clear that experiencing this, so being largely incongruent or having a lot of leaky feelings, is not something to be ashamed of in and of itself. It is very often a completely natural response to having something like toxic shame, or to growing up in environments where we had to heavily monitor ourselves in order to not get rejected or abandoned. But they are generally something that we want to start addressing, because the more incongruence we experience, the less confidence we tend to experience. Confidence tends to come from a place of being aligned with who we are on the inside and who we are on the outside. So when we walk into rooms, we give off the energy that I am okay with myself. I am not full of self-judgment and self-hatred, and I am not at war with my own inner state. Ergo, I don't need you to do any of that fighting on my behalf. And there is a very specific energy people pick up on when our body state matches our words and our actions. It puts people at ease, it makes others feel calm, and it helps us to feel confident and relaxed because we don't have multiple programs running simultaneously inside of our minds. But to get to this place, it often requires a great deal of work, particularly if we're coming from a background of insecure attachment, trauma responses, CPTSD in particular, and have not necessarily been taught how to get in touch with our authentic selves, never mind how to live our lives from that place. So the first thing I'm going to recommend you start with, if this is something that you really notice yourself struggling with, is addressing the problem of incongruence or leaky feelings on those first two levels of your inner experiences and your conscious awareness of them. So step one in becoming more congruent as a person is making the unconscious conscious. We can do this first by noticing where we experience cognitive dissonance. So in what areas of my life do I consciously think that I want something, but keep finding myself acting not in alignment with that? So maybe I keep saying I really want to be healthy, but then every night I go home and I eat junk food. There's some disconnect between what you're telling yourself you want and what your body is actually wanting. And most of us try to resolve that discrepancy by making our behavior match what we want to want, instead of spending some time figuring out what is the deeper want that my body is resolving for me that I am failing to accept. Getting in touch with that is going to help us with congruence. So this is, in simple terms, doing shadow work. I do have some videos on shadow work that I will link in the description of this one if that's a term that is totally new to you. But when we are doing shadow work, what we're doing is examining our blind spots. So figuring out where our feelings and our desires are not in our conscious awareness. We can also do this through examining our relationships with other people. In what ways do we find that we are consistently not getting the responses we want or expect out of other people? This might be pointing us towards a blind spot. Once again, if I think that I am Mother Teresa and I'm doing everything in my life for other people, but other people seem kind of turned off by me, is it possible that I'm not actually attuning to those other people and giving them what they want? I'm giving them what I want to give them. And my deeper desire is to be validated and recognized for what I want to give. And again, maybe I'm leaking out anger towards those people because they're not giving me what I want. And noticing how people are responding to me might be giving me valuable information about a blind spot that I have, about a place where my deep wants and desires are not conscious to me. Another thing we might want to look at consciously is which feelings do I think are the most shameful? This is most likely where we're going to have weird energy. If I think that there is something inherently wrong with ever getting angry or ever feeling desire or excitement, when those emotions come up in me, it's likely that I'm going to struggle to regulate around them. So those are the emotions that might be more prone to getting leaked out. And the more we make ourselves conscious about all of this, the more choice we now have about how we want to choose to manage and communicate our wants and our feelings. This leads us to the next step in this process of becoming more congruent, which is noticing where your own incongruencies exist and then making informed and wise decisions about when to align your behavior with your inner state versus when to self-regulate and contain your inner experience in the situations where you believe it is unwise to express it. So if we can't have total congruence, we can at least have contained incongruence, where we are not making other people feel uncomfortable because while our inner state might not match our actions, we are containing and regulating around our inner state, so we're not showing up with weird energy. We're aware of the wants we have that cannot be satisfied, and so we're not unconsciously trying to get them satisfied out of other people or out of our environment. What we want to be examining at this level is, can I actually be more congruent than I think I can at the behavioral level? If I know that I am attracted to someone, and I think that there actually is a way to let them know that without making them so uncomfortable that it's unbearable for us both, how might I do that? Or if I'm angry at someone, how do I make that conscious for myself and find a way to have a conversation with them that helps me resolve that anger without it leaking out of me? So I always recommend that as a first line of attack, we ask ourselves the question, is it possible for me to just get aligned all the way through with this? And if so, how do I contain that experience for myself and the other person while it's happening? So maybe this is creating a kind of new context that the two of you have never had, where you go to them and say, hey, I want to talk to you about something that might be kind of challenging for us to talk about. Are you open to that? And if so, can we talk about what boundaries we might want to have in a more serious conversation that would make us both feel comfortable? And it doesn't have to be as robotic as that. You can put it in your own language, right? I like to tell people whenever I feel like I want to get a little bit grittier or raw with them, that I have a preference for communicating in a way that's a little bit more honest than average. And it's important for them to understand that if I'm communicating in a way that's a bit more honest than average, that doesn't mean that I have the intensity behind what I'm saying that the average person would if they were communicating that. So for example, if the average person only expresses anger when it's at an 8 out of 10, if I'm going to someone and saying, hey, I feel angry at you and I want to talk about it, but I want to be clear that most people coming to you with anger are probably at an 8 out of 10. But I am someone who likes to talk about it when it's at a lower level. So I just don't want you to mistake what I'm about to say as being a really extreme response, when in actuality, it's kind of a small thing that I'm moving through. So we're finding ways to contain the experience for ourselves and other people so that they understand the context within which we are bringing it up. And they can consent or not consent to this context. And then we want to find a way to express what we're feeling in as clear and direct a way as possible without getting too attached to the outcome. So a lot of the time when we are being incongruent, it's because we are secretly wanting something from somebody. So even if we're expressing the truth, even if I'm sitting in front of someone and saying, I'm really angry at you, if I have decided that I'm not going to be okay unless they give me a very specific response, I am still being incongruent. Until I tell them, I'm really angry and I'm really wanting this response from you. Now, at the least, I'm congruent all the way through. The other thing that we can do is just try to practice being less attached to outcome. So getting real with ourselves before we go into the conversation that this might not go the way I want it to go. But it's more important for me to be congruent and to say what I'm feeling and to let someone know what my inner state is than it is for me to get something out of them. Or we just ask ourselves, how can I be maximum congruent here? So how can I let them know not only what I'm feeling, but what my kind of hidden expectations, desires, and wants are, even within how I want this interaction to go. And again, you might have to context for them. I am not asking you to behave in a certain way. I'm just letting you know what's in my mind so I can let it go and so that I am not showing up with weird, unexpressed wants. Now, what happens when we cannot be honest and congruent about what we're feeling or thinking because we do deem it inappropriate? In this case, what we want to do is make sure that we are containing our own incongruence, so moving it to that second level. The question we ask ourselves here is, how do I make it okay for myself, genuinely, truly, deeply, somatically okay, that my inner and outer world are not aligned? How do I adjust my thought boundaries and let go of my attachment to outcome so that I am not leaking out what I secretly want in every interaction that I have with someone? This might mean processing some disappointment or some pain around the fact that you're probably not going to get what you want from someone. It might be setting really firm thought boundaries with yourself. So going, I will not allow my mind to go to a place where I am, let's say, objectifying or fantasizing about this person, or where I'm having rage revenge fantasies about this person. Maybe there's a way I need to somatically get that energy out of my body so that I don't stay preoccupied with it in my thoughts. So part of this work might be killing off our fantasies. If we are secretly wanting something from the external world that we kind of feel like we have no business wanting, or like it is an overstep for us to expect another person to fulfill for us, what we might need to do a check on is, in what way am I self-regulating through fantasies of getting this thing that the other person can kind of feel when they're around me? And how do I kill off that fantasy so that it stops leaking out of me? This is kind of practicing mental and emotional hygiene for ourselves. So I remember going through a period once where I was holding a lot of anger towards someone. And it was someone who I decided it would not be wise for me to express my anger to. So I did kind of a thought experiment where I asked myself, who's someone who I kind of think of as similar to this person, who does the same types of things that this person does that make me so angry when they do it, but this other person doesn't really bother me? And what's the difference between how I am internally representing those two people? So let's say person A, the one who I was so frustrated with, and person B, who I found annoying as a person, but not really in a way that I felt any charge around, despite the fact that a lot of the things they did were similar to the things that person A did. And what I noticed was that person A was someone who I felt kind of attached to on an identity level. Because they were someone I'd been close with, I was thinking of their actions as in some way a reflection on me. Whereas person B, I was seeing their actions as relatively impersonal. I thought that's just kind of who they are. They would act that way towards anyone. And then I asked myself, if person A is someone who I'm not willing to express my anger towards, how do I kind of put them in the same category as person B, where I find their actions annoying, but not in a way that activates me? And this required me to confront some things around what I was projecting onto person A and how I needed to let go of my ideas about what this person's reactions meant about me in order to have the proper thought boundaries in place to stop myself from feeling chronic anger under the surface about them. And once again, I do think that as much as possible, it's better to be congruent all the way through. So to find ways to appropriately express what we're feeling even when it feels challenging. But this is a second best option if that option is not available to us for whatever reason. We can align our inner and outer worlds either through expressing our inner worlds to the people around us or to adjusting our expectations internally so that we're no longer wanting things from the external world that we know we don't have a way to get without behaving manipulatively, which very often leads to us leaking our feelings all over the place. And the reason why this is so important, and it's something we're going to go way more into in a future video, is because the more congruent we are, the easier we form connections, both to ourselves and other people. The more we trust ourselves, because when we're aware of what most of our motivations are on a conscious level, we're able to make more aligned decisions for ourselves. The more we trust ourselves, the more trustworthy we are interpersonally as well, because once again, we're not fighting this war inside of ourselves all of the time. We're able to say uncomplicated and clear yeses and nos to things. And the more that we're able to trust ourselves and be trusted by other people, the more our self-esteem rises. And so all of this eventually goes on to serve us in many different ways. But the first step is getting aware of when we are doing that emotional leaking and how we can get more in alignment with ourselves so that our feelings, our thoughts, and our behaviors are all functioning without significant conflict. This is one of the biggest and most pervasive routes to lasting confidence. All right, I am going to leave it at that for today. As always, let me know any thoughts, feelings, questions you have in the comment section below. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.